Walter, welcome back. This is video number 2 of book 3, Nostradamus Conversations by Dolores Cannon. And we were getting ready to start chapter 10. Chapter 10, information received about the present, meaning 80s, 90s, 2000s, maybe. So, one of the things that Nostradamus said, and this is really interesting because when he said it, there was no United States. Too many foreign countries own land in the United States, and soon, somewhere in our time, they will demand more than just the money. They will want assets. And the lifestyle of the United States will be changed. Political division, as he predicted, as part of the U.S. population wants war against these foreigners. But there won't be war. The investors will get their way. He predicts the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the USSR. Now, this is before these things happened. The sessions are before they happened. His predictions were several hundred years before they happened. He blames Bush for not dealing with issues, focusing too much on one thing, the Middle East, and letting everything else go to pot, and as a result, the rise of the Antichrist. Bush is directly responsible, he says. In later years, secrets will be revealed about Bush doing things in the background that will lead to the Antichrist. The turning point of U.S. history is then, and the time frame is important to try to figure out, but they don't. Oh, and I wanted to say, somebody made a comment. This just occurred to me. Somebody made a comment that not believing in, not really depending on the Bible, these stories of the Antichrist, that in these books we're throwing around the term Antichrist a lot, while I purport to not be religious. And I tried to make it really clear that this is not my words. These are the words that Dolores Cannon received from hypnotic subjects claiming to receive them from Nostradamus, a man of the 1500s in France, dominated by the Catholic Church. He would speak in those sorts of terms, that he would characterize the enemy of humanity as the Antichrist, because that was his historical cultural frame of reference. And I'm not about to change the wording because I'm just synopsizing the book. Nostradamus calls Bush a fox, a manipulator, not what he appears or pretends to be. Now that we're talking about Bush 1, the senior. Individual rights, he says, in the United States are going to be taken away. Justice, freedom, and liberty will no longer be visible. The U.S. people will eventually suffer because of what Bush did. Nostradamus said it was coming to a head soon, and now, of course, Cannon starts speculating about when, and she's asking herself, is this the Persian Gulf War? Some of this stuff sounds familiar, but not exact, and I'm thinking maybe we affected the timeline, but just keep that in the back of your mind. Nostradamus predicted that Bush's work and intention was to have a majority on the Supreme Court, in which the laws would be changed for his own ends, the programming of the people. And that Ronald Reagan was part of this plan. He said these people are patient. They will take whatever time is necessary. This will ultimately affect constitutional rights in America. Bush will do great harm to the United States in the long run. Bush attempts to get the Democrats in office to turn into Republicans and be Democrat in name only. Kirsten Sinema. The President of the United States has been secretly dealing with China for years. Bush has been studying the leadership of China, how to manipulate the masses. There's not a lot of difference, Nostradamus said, between the two countries. He predicts the rise of Marcos and his replacement by a woman, Aquino. He said that this guy will be really corrupt and will flee. Now, I'm a little reluctant to even talk about this next prediction because I don't want to get blocked again. So let's just say that Nostradamus talks about AIDS. And he has a theory of where it came from. And it's not the government story. And if you want to know what it is, you'll have to read the book. Because I'm very afraid that if I talk about this, I'm going to get in trouble for medical misinformation. So just know that it doesn't shine a very good light on the intentions of government entities. Things got out of hand. He said that a treatment eventually will be found, but millions will die first. He said that time and space are illusions of the third dimension, and we're stuck thinking in those terms. He can control his own vibration, which releases time and space, and he can see parallel times happening at once at the same time. He said if you have intent and believing, this would allow you to accomplish contact with Nostradamus. I don't know. It's kind of a misogynist. If your purpose in contacting him is not worthy, he will be silent. He says time spirals and creates moments during which you have to try to reconnect. And he will continue to reconnect with generations to come. He sees Russia having many independence movements and unrest. He sees eventually Russia and China will be unifying their militaries. The US and Russia eventually will be uniting, and Europe will be glad. And for a little while, that kind of did happen. He sees nations coming together and lessons in history repeating. He says corruption in the United States of the wealthy few, not caring for people and not caring for the environment, are going to be disastrous. There will be a shocking cleansing of the greedy and the corrupt. The party in power will fall. There will be many resignations. A temporary government with the first... there'll be a temporary... Now, this is interesting. It's a little complicated. There's going to be a temporary government. And it'll be the first time in American history that the third or fourth person in line for the presidency will actually become president. So possibly Speaker of the House. This is possible to happen in the next 20 years. So she asks like around 2010, maybe. It's hard to tell the exact timeline. So, we don't know how it's been affected, if it's been affected at all, and how accurate, what's 10 years, given how many thousands he predicts. China will eventually become a democracy after mass uprisings led by an underground, and there will be much bloodshed. Upheaval in smaller provinces of Russia, an underground movement in Russia, and actually she does a little PS and says this did actually happen after Volume 3 was published. The leader of Russia would be captured and eventually released, and there would be an eventual fall of the USSR. That happened, Gorbachev. Poland would be independent and democratic after a long struggle, which was already in progress in 1989 with the Solidarity movement. There is much evil around Catherine de' Medici. Nostradamus is astounded by tape recorders. It was like magic. I wonder what he'd think now. Oh my God. Pam was able through him to see the pyramids. She said that she's not even sure that they were pyramids in Egypt. They were pyramids. that it might have been part of the Atlantis civilization. And he says that Atlantis self-destructed. It was a big mess, and it just imploded on itself. It needed to start over, doing quite likely to themselves what we are doing to ourselves. He says people are now screwed up in their emotions and our way of dealings with all living things. A little different terminology, but he talks a little bit more about AIDS, and I'm going to skip that. I know you're curious, but I'm reluctant to get blocked again. He says there's going to be lots of rising feminine energy on the earth, that women will be teachers and leaders and are going to make a huge difference. That our stories will be so astonishing and the whole world would know them. And what came to my mind was that little girl who got shot, Malala, I think her name was. That these people will write books, their stories, and they will inspire and enlighten people. He says, before there's a sweeping change, there's going to be a rise in crime and unrest, especially in smaller countries. There's going to be civil unrest and demonstrations. Now, remember he talked about the cabal, which I suppose people would consider the 1%, the Illuminati. The agents of the cabal and agents of the Antichrist often work together in tandem, but the cabal wanted to keep communism in Russia because they were the oligarchs, they were siphoning off the wealth. The Antichrist prefers instability for his long-term plans. He wants social unrest, and that's a lot of what's going on. It's intentional. People are more vulnerable to his outside interests, and he can take over in subtle ways when there's social unrest. Communists will reinterpret Marx and Engels and reform to look more peace-loving, and they may help to form the underground against the Antichrist. Smaller USSR countries are more vulnerable to the Antichrist than Russia because of its size. The Antichrist's central power is in the Middle East. The cabal is not happy with increased Eastern European freedoms. The suddenness of change is because there are puppet masters behind the scenes making things happen. He predicts the rise of the mafia in Italy and its move to the United States. He says that they have much power and influence over American history. He predicts concerts. This is kind of interesting. He predicts there will be concerts for political causes and social causes in the 20th century. He didn't know what to call the music, but he described it as very loud. Rock concerts. He says that this will affect world events. It'll affect things like the war in Vietnam. And they'll provide disaster relief. And there'll be all manner of court entertainers who will raise money to help. Women will become more active in politics after World War II. And for him, that was a big prediction, a big concession to admit. Chapter 11, the near future. He predicts an increasing amount of terrorism leading up to the time of trouble. And the time of trouble is the political social upheaval of the Antichrist, which culminates in an actual literal earth shift. And that this earth shift is progressive. It's not just one sudden thing, but it will have a sudden thing at the end. But there are a multitude of events that are slowly leading up to it. So you're going to see earthquakes and volcanoes and storms. Melting of the polar caps. He talks about that. So he says the Middle East will attack a Russian ship, and there will be hostages in the Middle East. There'll be economic disaster that's manipulated. There'll be the crash of the stock market that's manipulated. The top rich will take the money and run to countries where they can hide. There'll be a major shakeup in the European common market. There will be trouble in Yugoslavia. The President of the United States will be caught up in a sex scandal. Clinton. Some near future president will be prepared to wage a war from space. A president will prove unscrupulous and throw the country into financial and reputational disarray. This president is affected by the influence of the cabal. No names. He sees warheads on platforms in space aimed at our enemies and at major cities of our allies. And he said they're already there. We just don't know it. He's using a prism on a chain from a tripod to cast colors onto paper. And by doing this, he's mapping someone's aura and bringing it into balance for healing. It's a little tidbit. He says a country that stands for liberty goes astray. He sees leaders wanting war for self-gain. People will reject them. Spain has those working for the Antichrist within it, but he will not succeed in taking Spain. U.S. and Russia will have just renewed a friendship when the Antichrist screws things up. This will happen when there is a new pope. And I had a lot of trouble. I did some, timelines and looking at things and trying to figure out which pope was which, because he predicts 2 popes assassinated. Well, one pope, there's assassination attempt, and one pope died under mysterious circumstances. It's to this day is still talked about as perhaps a poisoning. He said that it was a poisoning that mimicked a heart problem. Anyway, he describes a pope with Nazi connections, Ratzinger, who's pals with the Antichrist, but then there's too many popes in real life. Where does that put Pope Francis? And then he talks about the last pope will appear to be a really nice guy. Everybody will like him, but he's really cooperating with the Antichrist, and that he has a limp, and actually Pope Francis does. So I don't know. My mind is blown. He sees the assassination of a world leader in the Middle East, and the guilty one will get away with it. And I think Rabin, that was the one they meant. In 95, a powerful group of Arabs associated with the evil imam were responsible for the death of Sadat, and were responsible for Rajiv Gandhi in 91. He was killed because he could no longer be controlled. In 94, he predicts the death, and this is interesting, the death of the North Korean president. He said it was a heart attack, but it wasn't. It was an assassination disguised as a heart attack. That he was a threat with nukes, and people around him started getting worried. They thought his son would be an excellent puppet, and now they're regretting it. He sees the structural collapse of a huge new building. Many important people escape it. He sees a new president in France with religious extremist motives, who's deranged and causes trouble with French industry. And actually there was a problem with the French president in 95 who caused all kinds of unrest with the economy. I don't know if he was religious extremist. He sees scientific, medical, and food production breakdowns. He predicts the Nobel Prize, the existence of it. He says eventually we're going to do cultivation without sunlight, with using electromagnetism to make food. The United States government is increasingly top-heavy, and civic unrest will grow. The U.S. will survive, but people in power will be broken, and they're going to infringe on the rights of the people, and the people will rise up to get those rights back and get rid of the people in power. He sees 3 major natural disasters in the 90s in the United States. A major city nearly destroyed by a quake and volcano. He sees the sky is dark. He can't tell night from day because of the smoke and the ash. And he says it's a mountainous region of the New World. NASA at Cape Canaveral, he predicts it. And it will be badly damaged by a hurricane. It will flood. Cannon speculates about the greenhouse effect and increasing storms. And, it's just so much worse now, and I just don't even know what to think. Los Angeles, LA, will be badly hurt by a huge hot windstorm, dry. He predicts fires, winds, and drought, extreme heat in California, and huge forest fires as a result. And he predicts air pollution. And it will happen in seasons that usually don't have fire. Chapter 12, Hidden Information. He said he predicts this several different times. Lost documents will be found, and we will recover lost knowledge. And there may be several caches in different places. He said they're separately from those that he kind of equates to a latter-day Dead Sea Scroll type of situation. Separately from that, he predicts the discovery in Egypt of star charts and galaxy maps, and information about an energy shield that requires special knowledge to open, where secrets are hidden. This information was brought to Earth from Zolar, a planet in another galaxy that came to Earth for a vacation. Some of their group stayed and were buried, and buried the information with them. It will be found after an Earth shift, and it's an actual shielded door of an alloy that lets it be locked with an aura, an energy field. It will be an uncovering of history, our past history, and will bring old knowledge to the forefront to help us. In essence, he's saying that hidden historical records will be found. They're in secret vaults or passages. They include science and philosophy of the ancient Greeks. He says these writings are in underground passages, exploration. The passages will be found, then they'll be explored, and the documents will be found. He says he feels like someone, like a prisoner, to the weight of the knowledge of this future stuff. He's imprisoned by the memory of the ancients. He said he's too curious to quit looking, but he also feels a huge responsibility. He says there was a big loss of ancient information from the Library of Alexandria. There was a repression of true Christian message starting in the Roman times, and the Vatican is hugely responsible for this. There are many attempts to preserve information, hiding it in jars, hiding it carved on stone. He said not all ancient information was destroyed in Alexandria. It was intentionally suppressed, that there's an actual physical storehouse of knowledge that will be found, and it will be found soon. That is exciting, but we won't probably know about it. That's my prediction. Part of the Library of Alexandria was moved to the hills for safekeeping. Chapter 13, the Pope and the Church. Now, he's really into this, so, bear with me. A Pope will rise, have his face on coins, and the vanity will be his downfall. The corruption of the hierarchy of the Church, their dishonesty and attempts at personal gain, they will become public, and there will be a complete breakup of the Church. The Church will break into factions with different beliefs. Well, that's already really happened. He says self-exam and potential of human consciousness shapes the human world, humans and the world's beliefs. That the hermit, remember we got that card yesterday, that there's a lack of that, a lack of self-exam. The next pope from Cannon's present day, that pope's time won't last. His efforts won't be heard. And actually, that Pope did die. He's the one who only lasted 40-something days, and he was doing a beginnings of a financial investigation. Nostradamus shows the Pope who is shot will die, and the next Pope who is shot will survive, but will be killed later. Others agreed that the present Pope was assassinated in a European town near two rivers. Other prophecies. So I tried really hard. I hope I didn't make a huge mess of this. I looked things up. I looked up dates. So in 1989, Pope John Paul II was shot in St. Peter's Square. He died in 2005 from septic shock as a result of the flu. And after him came Benedict. He was a Nazi. He was the first pope since 1415 to quit. It's called papal renunciation. And I was shocked when he quit, because I was always taught that the Pope can't quit, that the Pope, his soul is indelibly marked and he's there till death, and that's the way it goes. There's no retirement for the Pope. But actually 5 have quit between the 10th and 15th centuries. There's this teaching of papal supremacy is why you can't have papal renunciation. So John Paul I, the big shots feared that he wouldn't cooperate, and he died after 33 days. Nostradamus says he was murdered. And John Paul II, Nostradamus says he was murdered. But it gets less certain as time goes by. So maybe we change the timeline. Benedict was a tool, he said. The church will fall when the public learns the hierarchy controlled it and manipulated it with invented rules and laws and pretended that they came from God. They did not. All religions with false prophets will fall, including Islam. All major religions. He includes all of them. John Paul II was poisoned, possibly with radiation, like that Russian guy that died. I think they tried to do it with Navalny too. Was it polonium or something? Polonium. The Antichrist will be able to manipulate the last pope with misused psychic powers. The church is rotten through and through and has been for centuries. This is quoting Nostradamus. Humanity cannot progress with the Catholic Church hanging around its neck. When the last pope dies, the Antichrist will stop the secrecy that the church has tried to suppress. The ancient knowledge of reason, logic, and science will all come back to contradict the church's teachings. Nostradamus predicts a worldwide rise in fundamentalism. He calls it fanatical. He says people lose touch with wisdom. They lose touch with a spiritual source and with their deity. And they will therefore eventually wither, but they're going to have an effect. They are no longer religions. They are gross parodies of religion. Leaders of religious power are hungry and abuse their power. It's as if the Catholic Church, what's going to happen will be as if the Catholic Church is swallowed up by waves. It's rotting from the inside and has been for a long time. False prophets are prevalent right before the Antichrist. Now he's talking about all Christian churches. At the time that he didn't have vocabulary for that, because it had not unfolded. There were no Southern Baptists during Nostradamus' time. The false prophets will be prevalent right before the Antichrist. They'll be at an all-time high in the 20th century. They will become rich, and their souls are rotten. They will reach huge numbers of people through technology, and they'll make huge amounts of money. True spirit turns away from organized religion. He talks about the scandals with fundamentalist preachers. He talks about the scandals in the Catholic Church. He used religion to control like a drug. He says religion becomes a drug, it becomes a poison, and it kills. The College of Cardinals will be disbanded permanently on October 3rd. So I guess that's not happening this year. The Antichrist will befoul all that is holy and is destruction to anyone who serves a divine power. And he's not saying that the Antichrist destroys the church and therefore the church is divine. He's saying that's already a whole other rotten situation. But the Antichrist is going to go on to destroy the good. Eventually, more people will be involved with self-examination, that light of the hermit, and spiritual development and cosmic wisdom. He predicts an awakening. Wise people will meet to consolidate philosophies towards world peace. There'll be a great number of philosophies through which one can find enlightenment. Everyone's path is different. There's no such thing as any one way for everybody. So important to remember that, because we're all at different individual paths. And Nostradamus says, and this is a quote, "Find what works for you." History of religion has always banned first all other belief systems, but balance will come. Our consciousness evolves to other planes eventually. And his advice to us today is try to expand your consciousness, and there are many ways to do that. Excuse me. Chapter 14, the Antichrist. All of his subjects that went under for the quatrains predicted World War III. Nostradamus says that we can avert some of this. He talks about the Persian Gulf War. He says that's only the beginning. The first rumbling of an approaching storm. The monster who would plunge the world into chaos if we don't heed the warnings. George Bush is a tyrant. This is senior guy. A great number of world woes will come from the United States and Bush and Iraq. The Middle East is out of control. He says an Israeli leader will be forced out, and then the U.S. and Russia will be in conflict, will try to heal their differences. There'll be an uprising in the Middle East. And so I was thinking, is he talking Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Taliban? I don't know. There'll be a revolution in the Middle East, which snowballs into a number of countries that follow. The Middle East must unify if humanity is to evolve. He talks about oil for knives, trading weapons in the Middle East for oil. He says the cabal is pulling strings. They decide who leads and who won't. Some trader will be made a leader by the cabal and is a puppet. Gaddafi, she asks him specifically, she's real fixated on Gaddafi. Gaddafi was manufactured. He was legit at the beginning, but he got into drugs and he got into chemical warfare and gas warfare and hallucinogens, manufacturing them. And he's firmly in the camp, well, he's dead now, but he was firmly in the camp of the Antichrist, but he calls him a ranting popinjay. So after many generations of bloodshed, the Middle East people will unify under one leader, but he brings them into more bloodshed and destruction. There will be intervention from other dimensions to prevent annihilation from nukes. But then a bomb is let off accidentally and on an inadvertent population like their own population, and they will suffer the consequences. He says we can intervene and control this. So we're going to do a whole lot of meditating here in the next month. Over years, a hypocritical leader who says one thing to the public, but then leads a very corrupt lifestyle on his own, is responsible for wars and rebellions. Various negative people fit the description of the Antichrist, and many of them are almost as bad as he is. But the Antichrist is worst. He's a master of manipulation. He's from the Middle East. He'll be raised by evil guy who claims to be an uncle, not really related, but the guardian. He will renew old hostilities. He's into torture and horrors. He will put out lots of propaganda, but makes it look like he's not involved. He's very sneaky, very sly. He doesn't care who he hurts to get power. His mother was a commoner. He was conceived in dark mutual agreement. I guess I left a word out. He was groomed to ego. I thought that was very interesting. He will lead many Middle Eastern leaders. He's not necessarily a political leader. He controls others who are very influential. He will control the wealth of the Middle East, and to control that is to control the world. He will steal a book of practices, meditation techniques, physical techniques that have been carefully guarded in France, but he won't have it long enough to study it. It was used by a family and a community that didn't share it and thought that no one knew they had it. But he knew, he found out, and he won't be successful in keeping it. And I don't know how much of this is even going to be public. He has psychic gifts like Nostradamus, but he uses them in a bid for power. There's a group that Nostradamus calls a coven that retrieved this book. They're able to use their concentrated power because the Antichrist is still not as powerful at the moment as he eventually will be. Nostradamus says that in our future, the earth shakes from fear of war. There'll be a communication break, but this can be avoided. When the Antichrist rises, he takes advantage of economic instabilities. He said, Nostradamus says, elected leaders at the time are weak men. A deficit in the U.S. makes it easier for the Antichrist. U.S. money will be worthless, and people will use items of barter. Some limited nukes will be used by the Antichrist in the area of the Mediterranean. Basic government and moral structure will be turned upside down. There will be confusion, and then in comes the Antichrist. The key issue of conflict will be the oil fields in the Middle East, and there will be so much destruction that food cannot grow. Too many people to bury. Mass cremations. The Pentagon will be bombed. This kills people, but not the building. In other words, there's going to be some kind of a biochemical or a radioactive bomb let off, a dirty bomb. And the building will stand, but the people will die. It turns the building into a tomb. It's done to create chaos and keep the U.S. military busy and distracted. The Antichrist hates Christianity worse than Russia hates the U.S. Wow. There'll be bloodshed in Mesopotamia. The Antichrist forces will infiltrate dressed like natives of the area. U.S. and Russia will join forces against the Antichrist. That ought to be interesting. Even the Swiss will have to fight. They'll lose their neutrality. Geneva will be bombed. He will take Switzerland, but it will be an empty victory. But he's going in to get the money and sneak money out. The Antichrist has research facilities on the U.S. East Coast destroyed to prevent nuclear medical research, because other research is being done too. The cabal will be reduced to 3 people who control the world history. But then the population will grow so much it'll be out of their control. They're just going to lose control. Okay, let's see here. What did he write? So Nostradamus says that the Antichrist is a figure whose thoughts dwell in the realm of darkness, whose motives are distorted, and who has expended knowledge in the realm of manipulating power. This person has conscious awareness of the great power we all possess, but this person also has conscious awareness of how to use and manipulate this power. This person is of the lowest, most disharmonious vibration. This is a person seen in Nostradamus' darkest nightmares and greatest fears, who does possess power to wreak great havoc and distortions on truth. And he's in the Middle East. Possibly Saudi Arabia. He has a network that he consults with, and he often comes from, they often join with him all over and meet in the desert. These are powerful men with corporate and other empires. They're all building underground cities for when the surface is unlivable. In the U.S., this is done by the government, but the Antichrist group has plans to take them with psychic power. The Antichrist will convince others to let off nukes. He plans to eliminate most of the population to start over, because it's impossible to control 5 billion people. They think they'll need to stay underground a long time, but not their whole lives. They've begun to take people who will serve these cities, actually kidnap people. They need water, light, hydroponics, internet, underground global communication. They will begin bombing when their plans are complete. So this is an aberration of power. The Antichrist is receiving negative collective energy. He thinks it's all him. Ego. He's known as a festering sore, a decay by ETs. So they know who this guy is. He's stronger than, but ETs are stronger than he is. They're here to restore harmony and balance. And this situation is intended, and this conflict, this disruption, is intended so that we all learn to change, that we have responsibility to clean up our mess. This is an impelling reason to change. We cannot blow up the underground or kill the Antichrist. We need this to happen. We can't try to prevent it by getting rid of them. He will be defeated by those that he calls the lice. The Antichrist has his own downfall by methods that he used to rise. All will unite against him, even his former enemies. His followers will be killed without trial. After the Antichrist, there will be no religion, and peace will be the global philosophy. Religion will be named after the seas, Pacific. Then he's got a word for the Antichrist from Kabbalah, which I will tell you what it is, but I don't know what it means. Adulankatif. So it's Adulancaatif. And somebody commented to me, this is terrible, why would we go through all this suffering? Well, we chose, like we're volunteers, we chose to be here to participate, observe, witness all of this happening, because this purge is the necessary growth pangs to evolve beyond it and rise to a higher level. What were we thinking? Chapter 15, concerning ETs and the future. Nostradamus is not surprised about ETs or watchers or the others from the sky. He says they've been watching us for eons. He's seen them in his mirror. He predicted, what did I mean by that? Oh, he predicted that ETs would meet with world leaders in a group of 7. One will be betrayed. One ET will be betrayed and shot. They'll meet under the guise of friendliness. At this time, it's common for them to meet. Earth leaders are are afraid of losing control. What he's saying is that our leaders are meeting with ETs right now, and they're afraid they're going to lose control. And one of them freaks out and shoots to show how much help that they're willing to accept, like tell the ETs, we're going to show you who's boss. The meeting takes place before the end of the 20th century. He describes them as small with hairless bodies. He says they're loving and forgiving. The shooting interferes with their plan to help us, but it doesn't stop the plan to help us. The ETs come from another time and other universes. Some are good, some are bad. Not all are benevolent. Some want to control and are able to infiltrate us. This occurs when we've established major communication with them. He said there is lots of traffic from the others that we thought they all came to help, but one type wanted to control us by capturing our minds. He sees ETs meeting in a big room, looking at a map of various solar systems and dividing the solar systems into areas of control. Power is delegated and one group is bad. It takes all the ETs a while to figure out this one group is bad, and they will evolve, but they're slower to evolve. To evolve, they have to go through the process of purification and elimination. We have to go through it to get better. Nostradamus sees star formations in this vision that he had never seen, that he did not know, that nobody knew existed. He sees man versus man destroying the planet, wars, quakes, and volcanoes. He says this will be the right time for a big change. He sees one madman pushing a button, causing an explosion, and then there are counterattacks. So the world has to choose sides after the destruction, and there's a new unity and a new communication from beyond. So there's communication from beyond already ongoing, but it's going to be widely known after the big conflict. The original power that started the conflict will be taken over and quieted. The world realizes it can't tolerate more of this and still survive. We will have new allies, not of this earth. We will be in awe, and we will need them. Humans will find a treasure on another planet, a giant metal resource like a lake of mercury type of thing that will be important to scientific technological communities, but when they go to mine it, they will discover alien life. So we're going to go out after resources on other planets and going to find more than we bargained for. Maybe this will be on a satellite like the moon or a planet not yet known in the 1500s. Hard to say. And these quatrains have layers. Our planet is of interest to 3 different groups, and it seems a desperate search. They can't go home, but they can come here. Earth offers them some sort of continued life, continuing their species. They're preparing for eventual colonization here. But another group will get here first, and this goes back to the beginning of life on Earth. So this is a return. ETs will come who will be regarded by some as the Messiah. They're not. He says it's going to be a time of great awareness, a new peace. One individual, but with many followers who have learned to live by universal laws and are bringing them to us, will help us. And they will walk among us to remind us of what Jesus did. But it's not Jesus. It's not the return of Jesus. It's just somebody advanced to let us know we can live that way. He won't come as a child, but from communication with other galaxies, and it will appear on Earth to share information as an adult. Does not want to be a ruler, is a teacher. Not a takeover of the world, a new way to live. Universal brotherhood, law, and citizenship. It will be showing us other places of life and abundance where people can live in peace and unity. He will teach us how. Many more will come with him. He will meet opposition, but will have telepathy to turn enemies around. Nostradamus says this may happen around 2050, and he will be human-like in appearance. Some will not want to part with their greed and their power and will cause upheaval, but eventually they'll come around and we'll have 1,000 years of peace. He talks about some sort of meteor collision in the sky around 2043. There will be a great leader before the great genius who will lay the groundwork to make sure his job is easier. Europeans will send the first manned expedition to Mars. One astronaut will die when his oxygen shuts off, and this is going to happen before the Antichrist, so he's saying that this has already happened in the 1990s. We have all the necessary technological abilities. It's just about governments and economies. The government and the economy collapsing is kind of going to be a problem for the U.S. space program. Great powers will unite to promote peace, health, and the environment. Barriers will be broken, bridges will be built with U.S., Russia, and China. The most powerful nations will unite to feed and cleanse the earth after a time of troubles, and there will be a new global unity. He says we can change that. This won't be about religions and political views. This will be about a new awareness. We're not going to go down that road again. Now he talks about the shift. Chapter 16, the shift of the world. There'll be a natural phenomenon that has happened throughout time regularly. The earth is a living thing and it's normal for it to move. If it progresses gradually, as it does now, quakes and volcanoes will release the pressure. But nukes are going to screw the natural system up and cause a sudden dramatic shift. And plus on top of that, we've been tampering with weather patterns. Those are not a normal thing. And polluting, and that could affect the shift too. Any deviation from the natural order. All the hypnotic subjects that Cannon had saw the same thing with varying degrees of severity. They saw reactions from reactions of people on the earth to these changes, going from a spectrum of mutual aid to each other to utter widespread panic and chaos. It's our choice. The shift will mess up the global climate, and she was shown floods and polar melting. So just to go back over what he said, the earth is a living thing and it naturally shifts, but the shift is usually gradual and not terribly dramatic. We would see changes, volcanoes and earthquakes, but it wouldn't be devastating. But because of a nuclear accident combined with the extra stress of environmental degradation that we've caused, there'll be a sudden shift. So we're going to go through all this awful stuff, part of the natural shift. We could weather through that, pardon the pun, but we've screwed up the climate and the atmosphere and polluted. And that pressure and a nuke, some kind of bomb, is going to cause, or maybe a nuclear accident, is going to cause a sudden shift, and that will be devastating. It will eliminate most of the population, but it will unite the rest. It's a time for each to undergo self-examination. There'll be one global government. Wealth and the monetary system are not going to work anymore. Many forces are causing an imbalance. Technology, our mentality, and our situation is fragile. And I keep saying this technology, I just have bad feelings about it. We all use it, but it's not going well. The shift is probable due to the negligent management of Earth's resources. Most tragic is the loss of trees, which are vital to the atmosphere. Without trees, we get wind. With the wind, we get erosion. With erosion, we get weight shifts on the planet. And from that, it contributes to the shift, and it causes temperature fluctuations. Basic needs will become our main concern, and it will be the end of life as we know it. Humanity will survive with telepathic help, but disease will be caused by it. A couple of different subjects said this had happened around 2000. It doesn't seem to, but we still seem to be going in that direction. A sea creature thought to be extinct will emerge because of the changes. It'll be called a dragonfish, as large as a whale. It's living in underwater caves right now, and they will protect it from the hordes who will want to look at it. Nostradamus says humans have put explosives inside the earth, and the earth movement, natural movement, could set them off. It could be an accident. And that nuclear waste that's stored in pockets around the planet are still explosive and have toxic energy. And they're not even necessarily meant to be weapons. But there's no place to put nukes or waste that's safe. And once you split an atom, you can't stick it back together. He says a sudden tidal wave over, now this sounds like Fukushima. This blew my mind. A sudden tidal wave over a reactor, you can't just turn the reactor off. It'll suddenly spread radioactivity, which lasts 5,000 years. Waste could reignite. It's not safe. We have to learn how to dissipate it safely. Setting it off in space might work. We will learn how to use natural energy eventually. Stored waste is a time bomb. Plate tectonics could cause an explosion. Eventually, the Northwest will be safe to move to, but not necessarily the coast of the Northwest. And space facilities will be there before the shift. People's consciousness will be raising. And this is at the same time as, but not because of. This is a natural evolution. It just coincides with all this other stuff. And we will achieve an acceptance that a lot of us are going to die. We'll realize that we'll survive with or without the earth, whether we're on the planet or not. Humanity will survive. Earth will become an advanced realm. Some areas will stay habitable, people will survive, and then the earth will be directed differently to cooperation and harmony. Survival will be a choice. Some will choose to go, others will choose to stay and cooperate, others will willingly go to another realm. Our consciousness and awareness will have increased so that it's actually a conscious choice. Stockpiling is not necessary. So few people are going to survive that there'll be plenty of places with food and it'll be shared. And we will colonize off-planet. Some areas will not be terribly damaged. There will be global leadership, not individual countries. We will direct energy to connect with ETs. There'll be less fighting on the earth, even quarrels amongst people, because it's like growing out of wanting to have schoolyard squabbles. There are more important things to think about. There'll be huge psychological, emotional, and metaphysical leaps being made, an increase in awareness and a decrease in panic. Decrease in awareness in the minority, but they're the minority. Most people will become more aware. Survivors will have to hide until this entire shift is over. It's a natural shift and it happens throughout the universe and it may take a while. There's going to be a high concentration of survivors in Asia. The United States will have a high number of survivors, and science and technology will be safe because of the cloud. Once over, relief and smooth sailing. We'll be learning. We'll have assistance from ETs. We're all related. We came from them, and we'll grow into a new awareness of that. The Atlanteans accidentally caused their own shift and destruction, and it was ego playing with fission and fusion. They had an accident. So we're in exactly the same spot. If two superpowers nuked, we could explode the whole planet. It was kind of a warning there. This may not happen, or it could be lesser but bad. It's up to us and to free will. The coasts will be inundated with huge waves, even inland. There'll be no utilities. There'll be no groceries. People will panic. There'll be lots of suicides. People will kind of go crazy, literally. The core of the earth will be churning out of control. The poles will shift. The orbit will shift. Before this, there are going to be dramatic weather changes, drought, food shortages, and less clean water. Regional conflicts, not country versus country, but more local. And then land will be uncovered in Antarctica as the ice shifts. Washington, D.C. will be gone. The United States will be in chaos. There'll be no services. There'll be no military. Important people will have been protected underground, but they have a limited amount of resources and time under there. They have to come out eventually, and then they will be equal to everybody else. There will be no leaders from government or religion. New leaders will be the people who can be calm, who can function in a time of panic, and who can communicate global ideals. The government will be in huge facilities in the Rocky Mountains and some near Washington, D.C. underground. But it will take a while because there'll be no communication to realize that this whole thing is global. And they may escape to the underground, but they realize they have no real plan and no practical way to really do anything. They're not prepared for global catastrophe on this scale, and there'll be no central government. Sounds like it's worth it just for that alone. Let's see here. So this will become our new normal in succeeding generations, living compatibly with nature and being aware of our cosmic connections, being aware of the power of our thought forms, and being cognizant of who we really are will be as normal as turning on the television, garbage disposal, or dishwasher and other ridiculous things that we now focus our attention on. This seems to last a long time. This is a much more positive scenario than having the Earth so chaotically out of balance that the whole planet explodes. But the majority of people will be dead because of flooding. And more will die after that from disease. There'll be no food. There'll be no clear water. There'll be panic and fighting. So for those who are around for it, it's going to look pretty bleak. But we come out the other end okay. And we have to keep our focus on that because there's no avoiding this. We can only mitigate the severity. So I'm going to stop here. This is the end of part 2. And we'll begin video number 3 with chapter 17. So I'll be back in a minute. Slongafoil.